Hello, Winning Season family. Welcome back. Lexi, welcome to the Winning Season podcast.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here with you.
Lexi, tell people who you are. Give them a highlight of your career. Start in the arts.
My undergraduate degree is in art history. So I started my working life at the Museum of Modern Art, which was a really nice, it was great. I traveled around the world picking up paintings and sculptures and bringing them back to the museum and having them hung up on the walls and, the whole thing. From there, I went to Credit Suisse First Boston. I worked on the Treasury bond desk. I ran the repo position, very different from the museum, but equally lots of fun and lots of great experiences. That just kind of kicked off my interest in technology. The bank was moving towards instant trade confirmation. That sparked my interest, and I picked up and moved to Europe. I got an MBA in finance there, and then spent the next, say, about 14 years working at startups and young growth companies, sitting on their executive management team, nominated as a succession CEO, really heading strategic partnerships and business development, but sometimes out of necessity, running marketing or customer service. And I was the traditional coach player, building the deals myself, and then eventually, when we could sustain it, building a team of both account managers, kind of the hunter-farmer, right? Both salespeople and account managers. Then over to Fortune 100 companies. So then spent the next 10, 12 years at big companies. So Google, MasterCard, the Royal Bank of Scotland. I have that unique mix of startups and big companies.
Lexi, you've driven partnership strategy at startups all the way through new initiatives at Fortune 100 companies. You've worked at Google, MasterCard, Royal Bank of Scotland. Looking back, what through line connects these seemingly different chapters into one clear narrative?
That's a great question. Over the 20 plus years, it's really all been centered on building the infrastructure for entirely new market categories. So in most instances, I've arrived at the company, whether it be small or large, at the moment when some technology was emerging and colliding with established systems. Starting with early on in my career, when we look at the startups, for example, I negotiated the first cross-network MMS platform connectivity in the UK, and that was to support multimedia messaging for a television show. And prior to that, the four networks weren't connecting together. So that really brought everybody to the next level. I also launched at the startups the first ever Sony Music mobile platform for them ever. In that case, it was on Vodafone Live. They had the ability to move the song up and down, depending on where the song was in the Billboard charts. So if the song had moved down in the Billboard charts, they could move it up on the Vodafone platform in order to create more sales. And it was something that we co-developed together. And so it was really exciting. And then kind of similarly, as I moved on to the bigger companies, I was at Google when tokenized transactions launched, Apple Pay launched Tap and Pay, and then we as a team pivoted to Google Pay and launching Google Pay in the US and eventually internationally. And at MasterCard, it was an established product called Send, but pushing it out into new markets. When I arrived, we weren't really doing cross-border as much, so really pushing cross-border and then pushing into new territories. So I think what connects these kind of seemingly different chapters is that I'm attracted to working where industries are fundamentally reimagining how they're going to work together. I thrive in those kind of messy environments. Like I think of Scotland, it was a new position that didn't exist before, and helping the bank to form partnerships with retail organizations that weren't financial. So kind of green. That's what continues to drive me getting into new space.
Lexi, you are a values-driven leader. So you describe truth and loyalty as non-negotiables. How do these values translate into your first meeting with a potential partner?
I mean, I love this question. It's so important. Truth, and loyalty, really in terms of partnerships, is around, clear commitments.
Yes.
Are really the base of all successful partnerships. If we talk about truth for a second, it's all about being transparent about what you can and can't deliver. This is especially critical when you're working with new products that involve co-solutioning and expectations around delivery times. So you can talk about something that doesn't exist yet, but then you have to ground it in the reality of what you can commit to and what you can't commit to. Google did a really good job on that. Google's approach is very agile. So when they're building new products and they're launching new products, they haven't set a launch date. They're really working towards when the product itself will be ready and when they can start to roll it out. Whereas if you're doing that with big banks, they're much more comfortable setting a firm launch date and getting their customer service ready. So two things come together, and if you don't talk about that in the beginning and you're not really honest, it could be an issue. So moving on to loyalty, which translates into more about being clear about commitments and how deals are constructed, then what does success look like for all parties in the deal, and what terms must be included to be sure that the clear commitment can be carried out without future friction. So you're trying to deal
Right.
with the friction within the deal negotiations, not after you've launched, although there might be some there, but you're trying to hit everything at the beginning. So for example, what are the expectations around promoting for both partners? What kind of resources will the partners dedicate to the promotion of this product or service that you're launching? What percentage of voice in all of the customer touch points on both sides will the partners commit to? Will the partners commit to almost surveying their customers? Getting those conversations out of the way in the beginning really leads to better sense of loyalty through clear commitment, because you can stick to what it is that you said you're doing. It boils down to establishing a clear list of needs on both sides, making sure all parties are having their needs met, and that compromises that both parties have had to make lead to something that's mutually beneficial. That way, when things do get complicated, which they always will do in complicated partnerships, both parties will be able to handle it together with honesty and with commitment, and that always leads to better success.
I agree with you 100%. When I think about my most successful partnerships versus the ones that crashed, it's exactly what you said. It's building truth as a foundation, it's setting intention, having clear expectations. One of the things that makes you such a strategic leader is your ability to not skip those foundational pieces. Let's jump into a pioneering moment. Can you take us behind the scenes of launching GPay internationally? And what early decisions set that rollout up for success?
I think it's an interesting case. I mean, GPay, which, now I think is more known as Google Wallet, so the actual app that you have, was live in the US, and we aspire to roll it out internationally. And in order for any international rollout to be successful, we really need to understand first not only what deal terms might work in different markets, but more importantly, how does the product have to be adapted to work for the customer, putting the customers first. What's going to make them happy? How are they going to use it? How does the functionality need to change in order for them to use it successfully? So in this kind of a scenario, something like a roadshow set of meetings with your target customers is critical before you start looking at terms. Google and the team, we did a great job at that. Sent teams of people into the markets that we wanted to address. We held engagement sessions with banks, retailers, and if we were looking at the UK market in particular, with Transport for London. So they're the organization that runs the tube or the subway and also the buses. And the findings that really drove the changes that we needed to make to the US product in order for it to roll out to the UK were around, for example, being able to tap and pay to go through the tube or the subway. So here, now in New York, we can do that. But at the time, nobody was tapping and paying, and certainly not on the subway or on the bus. But there, people were doing it every day. It was kind of like a toothbrush test. They were doing it in the morning to get to work, in the afternoon to get home from work. And if that didn't work, then forget it. Nobody would be tapping and paying for coffee. So we had to dive down into the product and realize what we needed was offline security keys, which meant that the tap and pay transaction could go through without an internet connection. So it would sync up once you got off the tube or before you got on the tube. And that was really critical. There was a lot of other points too.
This is fascinating, something that is seemingly commonplace for us now. Let's jump into expanding MasterCard's footprint. What's your favorite tactic for aligning diverse stakeholders around a single goal?
Something that's important at MasterCard, at big companies, but also at smaller companies. When you're looking at managing different stakeholders with different sets of priorities, conflicting timelines, potentially different access to resources, it might even be, and typically is, different demands from their management and different KPIs for their department and for themselves because they're on different cross-functional teams. So the tactic for both large companies is really the same. It's aggregating and setting clear priorities across the business and regularly revising these, right? You can't just do these at the start of the year. They have to be revised at least quarterly, sometimes monthly. And then surfacing these priorities with clear owners. So there really needs to be somebody that the buck stops with. So although everyone hates it, having more meetings on the calendar, nothing works better than a tight, short weekly meeting, reviewing the priorities. How are they going? Is there something that's come in that's urgent, which frequently happens? You need to leave a little bandwidth there, and pushing for those next steps. Find that this is critical in managing the stakeholders, especially you'll always have one or two stakeholders that are louder about their priorities and somehow find a way to wiggle around the process. And you really need to be able to surface those in the weekly meeting and make sure that everything's adjusted to the company's priorities and not just an individual's priority or KPI. The reality is everyone's overwhelmed with tight timelines. Legal, compliance, and regulatory need to have real clarity on the product in order to do their evaluation or the terms in the contract. Product wants feature perfection. Sales needs everything to happen yesterday and they're just worried about revenue numbers. You know, the integration team doesn't want anything to stay in the sandbox for too long, right? They want to get it out right away, but maybe you're trying to test something. So you really need to be able to pull everyone together, surface what the priorities are. That creates an environment where you can also surface success. On a really tactical level, you're able to say thank you very frequently to the people that are helping you to push things along and talk about the wins. That creates a compelling session and gives us great momentum and helps us to push over the hurdles.
This is a goal for building partnerships that last. One of the things that I'm hearing you say throughout our conversation is how key communication is. Personally, I'm very excited that you called out the myth that we don't need meetings. Meetings are actually a great communication tool. You brought that up as one of the ways to get stakeholders around a single goal. When a bank negotiation stalls, how do you spark fresh solutions in a highly regulated space?
Regulations are there for a reason, even if they create more work for us and more time before we get to the point that we can launch. But if we flip the conversation a little bit to what can we do, or what use cases can we do, and where can we leverage regulations to take action, then we can find loads of solutions. For example, frequently in banks, the first response to a new product is no. It can feel overwhelming. How am I going to manage all my compliance needs against this new product? But if instead we can take a minute to present the broad range of use cases and what the benefit is to the customer and what the benefit will be to them immediately, how that might impact multiple revenue streams for them, you can normally find instances that will work without them making many changes. For example, a business distributing payment to gig workers or a business-to-business transaction might have less regulations than a peer-to-peer transaction, than me as an individual sending money to you as an individual. So you might be able to start with those business-to-business transactions or those disbursement transactions. Or you might be able to identify an industry that is highly regulated, like gaming or gambling. And because of the built-in regulations, it might be easier for your product to succeed because all of those guardrails are already there, so there's less concern. Another point that's worth mentioning is making sure you're taking a look at what your competitors are doing. They may have solved the problem already for you. They may already have a couple of use cases in market. So that might be a really obvious and good place to start, not ignoring that. So in the end, sometimes the best solution is changing the timeline, not the deal structure, looking at starting small and building up to something big instead of launching everything at once, create this phased approach. And this helps the customer as well as the regulators to gain confidence in your new product. And you can move on to like the newer and the more difficult use cases a bit later on.
You touched on something that I want to go a little bit deeper on. That's timelines. You are known for normalizing realistic workloads. So, what have you seen happen to team performance when leaders model that?
I think that's been present in pretty much every job I've been in. Be less the museum at the beginning, but after that, I've really been focused on technology and finance, very fast-paced industries. More than half my career has been in startups and growth companies, so there's always these quick pivots, and even with big companies, there's normally some fire that you're fighting or a last minute ask. The reality is, at least in these industries that I've been working in, that there are no normal workloads and no normal work hours. And you have to be reactive to the needs of your company and, your customers. However, I do believe that great leaders understand this demand and they find ways to build balance, into the system. Maybe I can give you a couple of examples.
That would be great.
At Google, we would have kind of peaks and valleys. Peaks were very high. The valleys were maybe a little bit short, but they were definitely there. And there was a time, for example, when I was up with my manager and a whole slew of stakeholders until 4 o'clock in the morning, finishing negotiations on a contract in order to support big launch and an associated announcements with the launch. And that was something you just couldn't avoid. And we all wanted to be there. It was great for the company. It was great for us. It was great for the product. It was great for the customer. So you really didn't mind having that all-nighter. But at the same time, I really appreciated seeing that executives at Google would email around to their division, hey, I'm going on vacation. I'm actually not going to check my emails. I'm actually not going to be available. I handed over the decision making to this person and I have faith in them and they're going to do the job and I'm going to be with my family or take my time out. That set a really good example that would trickle down to also Google or at MasterCard and some of the small companies. The workday was really long, especially if you're working across the world. So you're working across time zones. You might have a 7 a.m. meeting or a 9 p.m. meeting. So how are you fitting other things in your life? And again, I've seen executives send around emails saying, hey, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I do a 2 o'clock Pilates class. It's for 1 hour. So I'm never available then. Like it really has to be something urgent. And that sets a good example because there's this recognition of you're working sometimes at 7 o'clock in the morning, sometimes at 10 o'clock at night, taking a meeting with Singapore. And so you can kind of move your day around a little bit to make this happen. I think on my side, something that I did when I was working for startups and younger companies, the same thing. It could be intense at times. I was also at that time starting a family. So I would have to take kind of weird time off for last minute doctor's appointments or, an infant that was sick, at short notice. And at the same time, I was managing a team of really young people who weren't in the family planning stage. They were in the, going out and having fun stage, which is a really important stage. I said to them very directly, you can take duvet days. You're out late, you're having fun with your friends, you need to have a lie-in, go for it. Like, just tell me. There's no way I can work this morning or today. Like, let's try not to do that the day before a big meeting. But, they've got their own last minute things that come up. Like, I need to sleep in today. You can't just always be on the side of moms and families and kids. You have to be aware that other people are at a different stage in their life and they need a little help balancing out their week too. So I think that's important.
Lexi, I'm glad you shared different examples. It's important to recognize in the workplace, people are showing up at different stages of life. And just because a person isn't in the family planning stage doesn't mean that they don't need a few hours.
That's right.
And by setting clear expectations to say, hey, you can have a duvet day, not on the day of a big lunch or the day before. And also, there will be times where we're up early in the morning and we're staying up until late in the morning. But balancing that out, it makes people really get fired up about those projects and say, you know what, we can pull an all-nighter, let's do it. And it builds that bond within the team. Such rich examples that we could integrate no matter what stage we are in our career. And you hit on something else about your relationship spans continents and sectors. What one habit keeps that global network mutually valuable year after year?
I genuinely care about like my colleagues and, not just the personal, but the professional people in my life and their success. And I enjoy seeing them succeed. That leads me to connecting people who can help each other. When someone mentions a challenge that they're facing or a problem that has them stuck, I immediately start thinking, who in my network has solved this exact problem or who could help them? It's not that I'm being strategic about my networking, it's that I really want to help. I genuinely want to help people to succeed. And I remember what it felt like at different times in my life when I was stuck with a complex problem, or maybe I was at a pivot point in my career. And can I kind of spare someone that frustration by simply making an introduction? It doesn't take much time or much effort, and kind of share my network with them. And the beautiful thing is that when people know you genuinely want them to win, they start bringing their challenges to you a little bit earlier, and they'll call and say, oh, I'm trying to solve this, do you know anyone, or have you had this happen to you before? And that brings you into their conversations earlier. And then sometimes you're brought into really interesting conversations earlier. Maybe you can help. And, colleagues trying to solve complex problems is really interesting. That is what makes your workday fun and more interesting. Having this mindset, for me, it's become my most sustainable source of opportunities and also kind of my most sustainable source of joy, because it's built on authentic relationships where everyone is genuinely invested in each other's success. And you and other people that I've met through you and people that I've met over the last couple of decades of working have become friends and not just colleagues. Some of them went to my wedding. That's super important.
Lexi, you are such a gem. You bring so much wisdom to what is intimidating for most people, which is working across the globe and working in these complex industries that are heavily regulated, working in startup environments that are fast paced. I want to take a step back. Let's say we're talking to the next generation. And there's an emerging leader who wants to break into global partnerships tomorrow. What foundational skill should they start honing today?
I mean, I might build on what I just said about genuinely caring for people's success and having that mindset as foundational skill. You just can't fake authentic relationships. It's got to be something real. You need those in your own company. You need them with your partners to succeed. You need them throughout your ecosystem of contacts. And these types of relationships rely on a few things like listening. Everyone says, listen, wait for the other person to finish. It's more than waiting for your turn to talk. It's hearing what people have to say about what are their challenges, what's their company's issues or challenges, what's their hopes and dreams, what's their North Star. Once you understand this, you start to build that connection, and then everybody succeeds. Also things like patience and having patience. Everybody's driving towards this month's objectives, this quarter's objectives, but sometimes people are working on a different pace than you, maybe faster, maybe slower. That can be a corporate cultural difference. Taking a moment to understand what somebody else's pace is and what they need is important. So having some patience in your conversation and in your rhythm, and going back to what I was saying before, it's really having empathy, trying to understand your customer, your coworker, your contact, what their needs are, what success looks like for them, what success looks like for their company, for their department, for their team, for themselves. Really trying to put yourselves in their shoes, and then opening yourself up to sharing the same thing with them. And then trying to find these mutually beneficial pathways. If you can do that from day one, you're on the path to success.
Solid advice for emerging leaders and a good refresh for those executive leaders of how to tap in and move to the next level. Thank you for sharing that. So before we go, I have some rapid fire fun questions for you. Are
Sure.
you ready for this round of winning
I
season?
don't know.
All right. So if you're going on a trip, are you booking a flight or planning a road trip?
I don't know. I have to say I do both. That's probably not what you're looking for, but I live in New York. I really love Maine and I like to go last minute and I don't like to deal with renting a car. So I'll just get in my car and drive, even though it's about a 7.5, 8 hour drive. I don't care. I download some books and go. Equally though, you know me and I live internationally. So like in the last couple of years, I'm like Spain, London, France. Where else have I been? Greece, Croatia, South Africa. So I like to fly around a lot too. So both.
So it depends on the day. You can go
Yes.
for booking a flight or hopping in the car.
Yes, both.
Okay, next question. You're going to wind down. Are you binge watching a show? Or are you picking up a book?
Binge watching a show. I love audiobooks. I devour audiobooks, both stories and business books.
Last question. If you need a pick me up in the day, are you going for caffeine or water?
I like hot drinks, but I don't do well with caffeine. So I like very much rooibos chai. There's a little tea shop. I think it's on Thompson, downtown in New York City, a couple of blocks south of Washington Square Park. That's been around forever. It's in a neat little shop and they blend their own teas. So I get tea from them. I get rooibos chai from them. I get vanilla rooibos from them. They also do an amazing blood orange tea that you can like make the hot tea, but then pour it over ice. So it's a cold drink. That's really good. They had a good winter blend. So I like that. I probably don't drink enough water during the day, but I like my non-caffeinated teas.
Non-caffeinated teas. The next time you're in the city, Lexi, we must go to Morgan's Library because they have a very nice high tea.
Yes, and we'll visit the one on Sullivan Street together. They have a great story about the shop itself, which I will have them tell you.
Well, Lexi, I want to thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule. I know you have a lot that you're managing to join the Winning Season podcast. Before we go, Lexi, can you share with folks how they can connect with you?
The easiest thing is probably to find me on LinkedIn. So it's Lexie Mendelson, and then you can just message me there or connect to me there.
And Lexi's LinkedIn profile is also in the show notes of this episode. And I have to give a shout out to our episode sponsor, the Resilient Leaders Program at ZeroGap.co. 3 months of powerful strategy, clarity, confidence boosting tips to help you take your leadership to the next level. So until next time, continue to emulate excellence and eliminate excuses.